This morning, I'm going to give a report on my efforts to bring my paper entitled, it's so long I have to read it, Evidence that A Christmas Carol was originally written by Matthew Franklin Whittier and Abby Poyen Whittier rather than by Charles Dickens, to the attention of quite a number of people individually. I don't have any advertising budget. All I have is my computer and, the same resources that everybody has. But anyway, this is a report. It's a really dismal prospect here. But one of the things I've learned is that results are results. It's all grist for the mill. Whatever results you get, you learn from it. So here's what we have. First of all, I sent out, I would say, upwards of 600 emails, and these were individualized and sent individually. There was a paragraph that I could customize, and sometimes I deviated from the script and just went on, if there was some particular reason to do so. I won't go into where I got an awful lot of them from the biographical sketches or profiles on university professors in the English department. I didn't go outside the English department. And I looked in the United States and the United Kingdom and Canada and a couple from Australia. So of all those, first of all, the software that's guarding against spam has gotten more sophisticated, I think, since I did this like a year or two ago, and then before then, back like in 2007. So the few that came back, I noticed that my email had been marked as spam in big letters. Probably a lot of them ended up in spam folders or were just simply blocked. Some of them were just blocked. And I didn't have any live URLs in these emails. Apparently they were blocked because they were not from within the university system. So apparently these emails that are listed for people on their profiles are strictly for use within the university system, and anybody that tries to write them from the outside, it gets marked as spam. So I don't know how many of these emails actually got to the people I sent to. And then on top of that, as I recently mentioned, there was a big snafu where after I sent all these, I tried to write to some people within Academia EDU where I have my paper posted, and my account was frozen, which means that on Monday morning, when a lot of these people would have come into the office and gotten this email and tried to not click on the link, but to cut and paste the link, they would have gotten a 404 error, and they probably wouldn't have checked back. See, so some significant percentage of people tried to look at the paper and found nothing. See, so with those caveats, the results are that, first off, with responses to the emails, I've got 2 responses which said that they intended to read, were interested and polite and said they intended to read it. There were 4 that were polite but expressed no interest in reading the paper. And there were a couple that mistook my intent, where I wrote to, for example, an editor of a journal. Well, I made it clear it was already published, at least I thought I had. But anyway, a couple of them said, well, I'm not taking any more submissions, or, it's already been published, or things like that. Then maybe from 10 to 15 of the people that I wrote to were actually journalists. They were teaching journalism, but they were still active journalists, or they were journalists with an august track record. And I wrote a different letter to them. Of those, only 1 responded and said that she was interested to, how did she put it? She was glad to know about it, but that she wasn't going to act on it, something like that. That doesn't count a couple people that I know personally. It's a very poor response. So then in Academia EDU, we find that this is from April 15th through the 25th, or 10 days. There's been a couple more early. This is very early in the morning. This is like 2:25 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. But there were a couple more already today, but I'm not counting them. So they give you document views, profile views, number of people that look at your profile, and unique visitors. So there's 174 document views during this period. There's also a category called readers, and for the life of me, I can't figure out what's the difference between somebody that ticks the stats, as having looked at the paper, versus a quote unquote reader. Some of them down, I didn't write down the number of people who downloaded it, but it might have been 8 or 10. So 20 profile views and 159 unique visitors. So of the maybe 600 plus people that I emailed, 174 actually looked at the paper. Now, I forgot to write down how many people read all of it, not counting the people that downloaded, because if they downloaded, I don't know how many pages they read later on. But online, there was maybe 6 or 7 or 8 people that read all or substantially all of the paper. Of the 174, everybody else most people read 2 pages, according to the stats. Or a few people read maybe 6 pages, and then there was a few that read somewhere in the middle, 17 pages, something like that. Now I also put it on my own server and provided a download link. That was not in the email, but I did email a few people later on, and also on my website I put it, and then later on when we talk about Facebook, I gave those people the option to download from my server. So 66 people downloaded that paper from my server. A lot of those were probably the Facebook group. So if you put that all together, 239 people total were at least exposed to the paper, first couple pages all the way to the whole paper. There was one prominent Dickens scholar who looked at the paper, and there was one prominent paranormal scholar who looked at the paper, and of course I can't name those people. Then I tried to message people within Academia EDU before it froze my account, and I think I reached out to 22 people who specifically had written about A Christmas Carol. I mean, if that's spam, I don't know. I was writing to people that had been right directly on my topic, and I got no responses from any of them. Now the Facebook group, there was one about A Christmas Carol that I got on briefly that I've already talked about, who bumped me off the group rather quickly. As soon as they knew reincarnation was involved, I think they bumped me off the group. And there was like 1 or 2 people responding there. But another one was about Dickens, and I won't name the group. This has supposedly 1,700 registered members on this group. So we're talking, almost 3 times the number of people that I tried to email, and all interested in Charles Dickens. So in sales terms, they were pre-qualified. And that's as much as I know about sales. In economics, I know supply and demand, and in sales, I know pre-qualified. So there were 2 waves of responses here. I would say total maybe 10 people responded out of 1,700. At the same time, 66 people downloaded the paper, quietly. So I think this is kind of a trend. It's that nobody will talk to me. I think of it as like, there's like people having a picnic, and a huge bear comes up, and they say, don't look at it. Don't look at it. Don't have anything to do with it. Hide the food and don't look at it, and maybe it'll go away. I think that's, but they will look at what I'm doing behind the scenes without telling me that that's what they're doing. So 66 people downloaded it, but only maybe 10 people would engage me. And there were 2 waves. The first group was like sort of troll mentality, pretty ignorant, I would say. And they ridiculed me, and eventually started calling me names and said things. I forget what they called me, but they said the paper was drivel, for example. They claimed to have read it. I don't think they did. I think they skimmed it at best. But they made some points. The first one was that they said that Dickens did believe in ghosts, and that he had even had a vision of a ghost. Well, that was news to me. And one of the things I found is that I do learn new things from engaging these people. And, I checked into that. And the ghost part was very interesting. In 1844, Dickens had a dreaming vision, like a visitation dream, of someone he didn't recognize. He mentions her stature. It was a woman. He doesn't say if she was tall or short, but he mentions her stature. And then later on, publicly, supposedly, he said that he thought it might have been Mary Hogarth, which was his sister-in-law, who I think he probably was in love with and who lived with him and his wife, for a while when they first got married. The history suggests that he was in love with his younger sister-in-law and not with his wife. He wore her ring like the rest of his life. I'll tell you what it looks like to me, because I understand Dickens' character now, and a lot of people don't seem to understand it, but I have a master's in counseling, remember. What I think was that he was in love with this sister-in-law, and that eventually he seduced her, and that she didn't know what to do. She couldn't tell her sister. She was so ashamed that she took poison and killed herself. The official history tells us that she dropped dead of a heart attack. Well, this is a 17-year-old girl. And whenever anything is implausible, raises red flags, in research. In my own research, this has been true also. I've been real honest about it. I said, well, this is really stretching Occam's razor, and there's really no coincidences in research, or they're very, very unlikely, by definition. So you get something like a 17-year-old girl suddenly dropping dead of a heart attack, and you have the husband, Charles Dickens, who pretends to love her with a great, deep, chaste love, more than his wife, used her as a character in several of his stories and wore her ring all his life. But then you find out that he actually was a very base character with a strong sex drive, who was a, sensationalist person. And you put two and two together, and you think he had to have seduced her, and she had to have taken poison and dropped dead. So, of course, nobody would believe me about that, but I'm telling you, with my background in counseling and looking at the entire history as a whole, that's probably what happened. Well, anyway, this woman came to him in a dream, and there was a little dialogue where he asked her what was the best religion. Well, what he meant was, what was the real religion? I'm sure by the context. And she answered, for you, Catholicism. So now what I know is at least three clues here. One of them is that Abby Poyen Whittier looked rather like Mary Hogarth. And I actually gave a comparison picture to the group, and there was no comment, of course. Secondly, Abby was Catholic. And thirdly, she had a way of turning a question like that. That was typical of her. Somebody would say something or ask a question, and she would come out with a zinger that turned the whole thing around and made you look at it from a completely different way. I've got examples of that. She was an excellent debater and brilliant, very, very sharp. So this is 1844, the year after A Christmas Carol was published, and Dickens did not believe in ghosts, not really. He loved ghost stories, that's my understanding. Now, the people on the forum insisted that there were letters that proved that many letters that proved that Dickens believed in ghosts. And I asked for anything before 1843, not afterwards, because afterwards the waters are muddied with this visitation dream. See? So I wanted any letters that proved that Dickens took the paranormal seriously and had any understanding of it before A Christmas Carol was published. And not only did nobody come up with anything, they accused me of discounting anything before as opposed to after, And then they refused to go back and quote me properly. See? So that's the mentality that people I was dealing with in the first wave. So I think that Abby came to Dickens in a dream specifically to prove to him that ghosts were real. It didn't change his character at all. I don't think it really changed his beliefs, because as I told the group, there's a recorded instance in a letter of John Greenleaf seeing his little sister Elizabeth in a dream, and it disgusted him. I think that's the word. I mean, it horrified and disgusted him, and he didn't change his views really. He rode the fence about those things, probably like Dickens did, but privately he didn't believe it. And I don't think Dickens did either. So Abby may have come to him to try to prove to him that spirits were real, and it didn't really work any more than the Christmas Carol really transformed society. It's kind of a little too ambitious. So the second thing they talked about was that they ridiculed me for believing in reincarnation and for bringing reincarnation into the matter. And so I argued that a little bit, citing Dr. Ian Stevenson. Then a philosophy professor joined the discussion and talked about the skeptical work against Stevenson's own studies. And I went ahead and referred him to Dr. Robert Allmeter, whom I had interviewed in my documentary, and he didn't have a whole lot more to say after that, because my documentary is offered for sale by Films Media Group, which is also Facts on File, to universities. So suddenly I had a little bit of credentials. I wasn't just a complete nutcase in that field. But so he was polite. And then the third thing they brought up was that I am ignorant about even the most, I'm reading from my notes, about even the most basic knowledge of Charles Dickens' life. And they proved it because well, let me back up a little bit. They were telling me about Mary Hogarth and the visitation dream or the vision. They didn't say it was a dream. They said it was like a vision. And I found online a little article about it. I don't have access to the Pilgrim edition of Dickens' Letters, which is like $400 for one volume, or 3 volumes. And I can't get it online because I don't have any access to Oxford University online, being a lay scholar. But I can use the internet. So I got on the internet, being that I was forced to use that kind of source. And I found an article, and it called Mary Hogarth Dickens' aunt, as opposed to his sister-in-law. And they ridiculed me because I didn't even know this basic thing about Mary Hogarth. It was in even the cheapest paperback books, as they put it. Well, I explained to them that I am not a Dickens scholar, that I'm a Whittier scholar, Matthew Whittier scholar, that I researched the history of A Christmas Carol specifically, that I did not research the entire life of Dickens. And I admitted that maybe I should have. I said I had a lot on my plate, that a lot of people plagiarized from Matthew, and I had to prove all of these cases. And I don't know if I mentioned it, it's painful for me to read a lot of Dickens, understanding what I do about him. I really would just soon not immerse myself in his life. I've already immersed myself in his life more than I want to. But what I specifically researched was where A Christmas Carol intersects with Matthew and Abby. And the facts about Dickens that I know came into that picture as I researched the history of A Christmas Carol. So I don't know everything about him, and I stand to learn, and I admitted that. So there were 1 or 2 people who stepped in and tried to defend me, not in the sense of he's got anything valuable to say, but just even though he may be crazy, let's be nice to him, which was appreciated, timidly so, not strongly, but they timidly suggested maybe we should be nice to him. And they also suggested maybe we should read his paper before we blast him, then you can blast him. So that was the first wave. The second wave was scholars and people who were a little more intelligent. And they had a number of comments. The first was that I should go through channels. With these things I really anticipated. And that was that I should submit to scholarly journals and go through the refereeing process where the experts decide if my paper is worthy of being published. And they didn't say I should have gotten a degree in the field, but they probably mean that as well. And I explained to them that my discovery is too radical and that nobody within the system would have it. Very simple, It's true. Anybody in the system that tries to come out with this is going to get fired and their reputation ruined. That's just a fact. It's happened in any number of fields where people have tried to come out with not just paranormal, but any kind of exceptional information. The second thing is that I should let the professionals handle it, and that the analysis of it should be textual. I did look this up. It's textual, kind of hard to pronounce. Analysis. In other words, that they have tried and true sophisticated methods for comparing writing. And I made the point that Dickens reworked it. So of course you're going to find all kinds of elements of Dickens writing in this. And one of them echoed that, gee, well, that really wouldn't work because Dickens reworked it. What you can do is compare his handwritten draft with what he scribbled out underneath. It's very difficult to tell because he used a very heavy corkscrew redaction, but I did that in my paper. I compared the handwritten draft looking at what was underneath that he'd erased versus what he rewrote. And it's clear that Abby wrote what was underneath, that he presumably copied over, and that he scribbled out what Abby had written, which was more deeply spiritual and esoteric, and put some religious sounding mumbo jumbo in place. It's a smoking gun. There's no question about it. Of course, I didn't talk about that because I was expecting them to actually read the paper, and read not just, 5 pages or 17 pages, but the entire paper. And then they said I should keep reincarnation out of it. If I want to be taken seriously, I should keep reincarnation out of it. And one of them said something to the effect that lots of people have intuitions and things, but they don't include it in the paper. That's not entirely true. I think Einstein did, freely admit that he got certain ideas out of a dream, and it's hardly the first instance. But in this case, I told them that I had, absolutely no intention of taking reincarnation out of it, that reincarnation was an integral part of it. Well, first of all, that's one of the main reasons I'm doing it, is to reintroduce reincarnation into academia, at least in a way that they have to grapple with it, if not convince them. And so it's exactly what I want to do. And secondly, I basically told them that y'all have had your chance for 150 years or more, 170 years, whatever it's been. You've had your chance without past life memory to figure this out. And not a single one of you has ever, stumbled upon this. So it took past life memory and reincarnation. Essentially, it took the author, one of the co-authors, to come back and find it, because nobody else was going to do it. So reincarnation absolutely has to be in it, because it was only through reincarnation that it could have been discovered in the first place. The question kept coming up, which is related to this last one. How could it be real if no scholars have ever found it? In other words, there's a kind of a circular logic. No scholars have ever found it. If it was real, scholars would have found it. Therefore, it can't be real. That's the logical circle. Well, what I just said explains that. They couldn't find it. And I explained further that the reason they couldn't find it is they were coming from the wrong end. They're coming from the plagiarist side of the picture. You certainly can't prove it, and you can't really even discover it from the plagiarist side. You can only prove it from the author side, and nobody had stumbled on the author until I did. And then I worked it backwards. I worked it from the authors. Now, the other thing about this I've got in my notes here is that if I look at the history of Charles Dickens and these other plagiarists, they all covered their tracks. They were all accused, or most of them were accused at one point or another, not all of them. But Dickens was definitely accused of plagiarism quite a number of times. And one fellow who accused him, he destroyed his reputation. I mean, he trashed the man. And he was just like a reporter, and he trashed him, viciously trashed him. And I think that his charges were spurious. I think Dickens made it up. I mean, he was not a nice guy, Charles Dickens. So what happens is that damage control is done. Now, you got two people doing damage control. You've got Dickens, and you've got his friend and publicist, John Forster. Even after Dickens died, John Forster continued to defend Dickens. So these are intelligent men, and they lied flat out, to be blunt about it. These people lied, and they concocted explanations to refute the charges of plagiarism. But scholars have accepted all of these explanations, Well, the point that I've made is that we now know that together, working together, Charles Dickens and John Forster both lied in order to try to get Dickens' wife, Catherine, put in an insane asylum. It's not said specifically, but it's clear that logically, A, they tried, both of them. B, it was unfair and unjustified. She wasn't crazy. To the extent she was crazy with jealousy because Dickens kept lying to her about his affair, which will drive anybody crazy. If they know that somebody's having an affair, their husband or wife, and the person lies to them and ridicules them for it, certain percentage of people will go crazy under those circumstances. But basically, they both had to lie in order to get Catherine Dickens into an insane asylum. That means that not only Charles Dickens' credibility is moot, but John Forster's credibility is moot. So anything that either of these two people say in defense against charges of plagiarism is moot. You got to throw it out. Well, of course, the Dickens scholars have not done that. So that means that what you should really do if you want to understand Dickens is assume that basically all of these charges are true. Go back and completely rework your understanding of Charles Dickens' life based on the assumption that all the charges were actually accurate. And then you'll see a very different picture. And then lastly, over and over, they would say, I've read the paper, which they may or may not have. They may have just looked at 2 pages. They may have skimmed it, and there's no evidence. There's no solid evidence. It's all just guesswork and speculation. Well, that's just a flat out lie. Now, whether people are telling that lie to themselves or whether they're telling that lie to me and everybody else, it's very difficult to discern who is lying to themselves and who is lying to other people, knowing darn well that they're lying. But if you read that paper, at the very least, you can see that I've been rigorous and that I have real evidence, including the one that I just referenced from Dickens' handwritten draft. I can show in the draft that somebody, presumably Abby, said something that was deeply esoteric, and I know mysticism. I've studied it for 47 years, and I know that the person that wrote that statement concerning the soul set free immortal, and you can see it under there, under the corkscrew, that was a mystic. And then Dickens, I forget what he actually said, but it was like to sow the seeds of love immortal, I think, which means nothing. That's a religious sounding phrase that you could say in any Baptist church and get away with it, see? Well, logically, the person that wrote the first version could not have dumbed it down the way that Dickens did. In other words, Dickens could not have written the first one and then decided, oh, that's too spiritual, I'd better dumb it down. Because a person that would write the first one would have too much integrity to dumb down that expression of mysticism. So therefore, it has to be logically that a person who had no respect for real mysticism dumbed it down for the public. And we know Dickens did that. So therefore, we know that the first statement could not have been originally written by Dickens. And that one little tiny piece of evidence tells us that Dickens secularized someone else's work. Okay, it's a smoking gun. It's proof positive. So my point is that these people who say he's got no evidence, he's got no proof, it's all just guesswork, they're making themselves feel better, but they're lying in order to do it. Okay, that's not the only piece of objective evidence in that paper. So that's the experience I had with Facebook. There were a number of people who said they were going to read it and get back to me with feedback, and they never did. Now, it's only a matter of conjecture as to why. Did they read it? Supposing they read the whole thing with an open mind, which I asked people to do, did they decide that it was not worthy of comment? It was so bad that it was not worthy of even pursuing the matter? That's what they told themselves, I'm sure. The question is if that's really what they did. Or did they read it and they realized this is real. This guy's actually got something, and I'm not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole because I'm going to get ridiculed and I'm going to get fired. I don't dare come out publicly and say anything about this. I don't know. I mean, which is which? I would guess there was some of the latter category. So now I've also written to some more people, some more scholars, and now it's getting a lot harder to find them, but I can scare up a few to write to. I think I wrote to maybe 10 people like that yesterday. And then I also wrote to New Age organizations. Now, I won't go into this in any great length, but I don't really fit with the New Age organizations either, because the kind of mysticism that I've studied is actually more advanced than that. I won't go into that any further, but they really won't truck with me either. I got one response so far from those people. It was a magazine or an e-zine, New Age magazine. And what this person said was that it didn't really fit with what they're doing because they're doing meditation and chanting and purification and all the spiritual things, whereas all I'm doing is some kind of reincarnation research, and that's not spiritual. See, well, I tried to explain to her my rationale that it's kind of like social chiropractic in the sense that the disbelief and the prejudice against reincarnation, in my opinion, is a block that keeps people in the West from accessing deeper spiritual teachings. As long as you are dead set against reincarnation, there's a whole vast array of deeper teachings which is blocked to you. So I'm trying to clear the underbrush and remove one block. And it's a deeply spiritual enterprise, in my opinion, and certainly deserves a place in their offerings. But I haven't heard back. I probably won't hear back from that person because they were basically politely rejecting me. They weren't initiating a dialogue, So I got one New Age person and, one reporter, but a whole bunch of people read it or looked at it. And some of them downloaded it. We don't know how much they've read. So here's my guess. There has to be, and this is because the paper is real and the evidence is real, and it's a powerful paper, and it's a major pioneering discovery. Regardless of how much these people may want to dismiss it in a Facebook group or diss me by not even answering the email, they know it, They know darn well what it is. And there will be a buzz behind the scenes, because if 176 people looked at this paper and even more read the title, which, evidence that A Christmas Carol was originally written by Matthew Franklin Whittier and Abby Poyen Whittier rather than by Charles Dickens, that's it. You've now got the message if you've read the title, So allowing for emails that didn't get to people, at least 300 people have read the title, and 270, what did I say? No, 239, excuse me. 239 people have at least touched the paper. 7 for sure have read the entire thing, all 48 or 49 pages. There has to be a buzz. So I have leavened, or poisoned, depending on how you want to look at it, I have leavened the group that potentially is interested in this. And there will be a buzz. Now, what the result will be, here's the first thing that normally would happen. If people could cut me out and publish on this and claim it for themselves, then that would be their first choice. And they can't do that because my internet presence is huge, even though I am basically unknown and unappreciated. Put my name in any search engine and you'll come up with a bunch of stuff. So given the age of the internet, they cannot claim it for themselves without me being hot on their heels, or without 400 of their colleagues ridiculing them by saying this isn't original, because they all know. Okay, so they've all been put on notice. Not a single one of them can steal it because they all know that I started it. See? So that would be their first choice. The second choice is to let me present it, but through channels, and keep the reincarnation thing out. Well, I refuse to do that. So therefore, they have to just talk about it and strategize and read it and check my sources, which they'll find are all correct, and talk about it amongst themselves and try to figure out what can we do about this, Well, so far they can just ignore me. All of them can marginalize me by just ignoring me, hoping I will go away. Well, I won't go away. Eventually I'll pass on, but I'm hanging in there. So then I've got the article about Edgar Allan Poe, and the whole thing starts again with another set of scholars. And the evidence for that is quite a bit stronger than the evidence I have regarding A Christmas Carol. I keep saying that, but I'm telling you, the evidence I have that Matthew was the original author of The Raven is very strong. So I'll go through the same thing with the with the Facebook groups. And I've also posted on bulletin boards, and maybe 3 or 4 bulletin boards, and haven't gotten a single answer on them, including a reincarnation forum and literary forums and so on. No response. And I used to get responses. So this is interesting. That suggests that people know me now. They've heard of this crazy stuff, and not a single one of them is going to even deign to respond now, whereas before they would have. I'm guessing there might be another explanation. The Poe one is even stronger. So I go through the whole thing again, being ridiculed and having people come up with all kinds of arguments that I actually can answer, but which they won't listen to the answers. And a whole bunch of people reading the paper and hardly anybody responding. And I've got 2 more papers after that. One having to do with Elizabeth Barrett Browning and another one having to do with Margaret Fuller, both of whom plagiarized Matthew Franklin Whittier. And the answer to this thing is very simple. There's only 2 explanations. One of them is that I'm crazy, that I'm a megalomaniac, and that I just picked some person to be in the past and arbitrarily assigned these famous works to him. And I'm trying to build up my own ego by associating myself via reincarnation with these famous works. That's the obvious solution, the obvious answer. It just doesn't hold water if you look into it. But nobody looks into it because it's the nice, comfortable explanation, And the second explanation is that there was actually 2 people in history, Abby and Matthew, and then after Abby died, Matthew continued, who were child prodigies and who were exceptionally good and exceptionally creative, who were deeply devoted mystical Christians, esoteric Christians, who were deeply moral and concerned with social reform, and who were exceptionally talented, and who kept themselves entirely anonymous, to the point that other people plagiarized their work, falsely claimed it, that rumor falsely pointed to other people who then admitted it, or that scholars have mistakenly attributed the work to other authors, and that a great deal of Matthew and Abby's work has come down to us as having been written by other people, some of whom are famous. And it's not surprising because they were so good. That's why it got famous. So that's the second explanation, which is the truth. But that one means that everybody has been embarrassingly wrong. All the scholars have been wrong. All the Dickens scholars have been horrifically wrong because they've all assumed that Dickens was the real author of A Christmas Carol. They've all assumed that Poe wrote The Raven. They've all been fooled. So it's going to be hugely embarrassing to a great number of people. And they're going to fight it like the Dickens. They're all going to be Raven. But it's the truth. And as I explained to them, my agenda, aside from introducing reincarnation, which I didn't say, is to reclaim Matthew and Abby's work for them and to reestablish their legacy, to reconstitute their legacy and to establish it, and to have, I would ideally like to have a little museum that people can come and learn about Matthew and Abby's work and their lives. That's a tall order. Of course, I need a lot of money for that. I've had no donations whatsoever so far. I put up a little crowdsourcing thing, LiberaPay, I think it is. I think it's French. And the reason I use them is they don't have these tiers where if you donate more, you get special privileges, which I don't believe in. So this one doesn't have that. So I've got that on my website, the little logo. You can click on it and donate X amount per week. Not a single person has donated anything. So far, none of these New Age organizations have donated any exposure, which is really what I was asking for them. Please, help me spread the word, and one of them offered to let me buy some ads. The one that responded with the magazine offered to let me buy ads. I wrote back and said, I have no funds, and I haven't heard back. So they don't want to give me any ads. See, so this is the great generosity of the New Age, their spirituality, we'll see just how spiritual they are, So that's the results. And my last couple of entries here have gotten 10 views each. And not a single person has reached out to me or wanted to support me or indicated that they believe me. So this is what Abby calls gawkers. You all apparently are gawkers. Not a single one believes me to the extent of wanting to help the work that I'm doing, honestly. So of everybody in the internet universe, I can only pull in 10 people. And I do that when I provide real evidence. Like the last time I provided real evidence that Matthew weighed in on this question of Dickens pretending to have written A Christmas Carol and pretending that he could write something of equal worth in subsequent years, which is bullshit. He couldn't. He manifestly couldn't do it. And everybody knows that none of the pieces that he wrote subsequently were anywhere near of the quality of A Christmas Carol. So here you have a man who is worried about going into debt, who claims to have written A Christmas Carol in 6 weeks. And the two people who tell us how he did it are Dickens the liar and John Forster the liar. And he could never do it again, And he modified his handwritten draft, which proves that he was reworking somebody else's more spiritual work. It's manifestly obvious, and the situation with the Raven is even more obvious if you know how to look at it properly. I don't know what else to say. It's a hugely disappointing response, but I really didn't expect much of a response because I understand what I'm up against. I wanted to put people on notice. I wanted a large number of people to be exposed to the information, partly so that nobody could steal it. Because like I said, if anybody tries to claim that they came up with this on their own, they'll be laughed out of the ballpark because everybody else has gotten my letter. See, and it's dated, and the paper's been published. It was published on a paranormal e-zine that none of them would have any respect for, but nonetheless, it's been published. See, so I don't know what the future of this is. I do know that for myself, like I'll close with one thought. There was a fellow that I saw showcased on a UFO Hunters episode. He was a physicist, I forget his name, Johnston or something like that. He had spent many, many years researching UFOs and meticulously documenting everything, doing the math, and interviewing people. And he had audio recordings and photographs and the whole thing. And it had been donated to some library and, is in their collection. And the UFO hunters were able to access the collection. Well, after however many years of doing this, he committed suicide. And now he might have had some romantic problem or something, but my guess is he committed suicide because he'd done all this work and everybody continued to ridicule him and nobody would take him seriously. Well, that's not going to happen with me. If anything ever happens to me, you can know I didn't commit suicide. First off, I'm a follower of Mayor Baba, have been for 47 years. I know that suicide is big trouble. You don't want to do that because you land yourself in real hot water. And I will never commit suicide. So if it ever looks like I did, I'm telling you flat out, I did not. But I know that the way to proceed with these things is with full vigor and yet turning the results over to God. If you do that, you can continue indefinitely to push as hard as you possibly can and do the best work you possibly can and never get severely discouraged, even with an outcome like, what I've got here. Even being totally ignored and ridiculed. I just keep on keeping on, and I can do that indefinitely. And I will do that to my last breath, basically. And I can write and I can research. I know that people in this forum were kind of discounting me because I was an untrained scholarly researcher, but I've pretty much figured out how to do this. After 11 years, I'm pretty good at this, better than they are because I got the results and they didn't, So that's a report. we'll see what happens. I'll keep everybody posted, all you lurkers out there. And there's one other thing I wanted to bring in. I was watching. I don't have any money, so I can't sign up to watch tennis online live. I can only catch it like a year or two later when somebody puts it on YouTube. But there are announcers out there, like radio announcers, who will give you a play-by-play verbal description. There's several of them. And some of them are very sensationalized, very entertaining. They might have like more than one person or bring in all kinds of fancy graphics and stuff. And I ran across one fellow the other day. He was a Brit, and he just is really knowledgeable about tennis. And he gave you a very nice description of what was going on, but he wasn't hype. And there was anywhere from maybe 6 to 19 people watching. The other guys get like 100 and something. This guy had like 6. And of the thumbs up and thumbs down there on YouTube, he had about equal. He had about 6 or 7 thumbs up and about 6 or 7 thumbs down. In other words, he wasn't sexy enough. He wasn't sensational enough to catch frivolous, superficial people's attention, see? And they didn't like him, and they moved on to the other guys that were all hyped up and fun and everything, but who didn't know as much about tennis. Well, I think it's kind of like that with me. I identified with that guy. I gave him a nice thumbs up, and I hung in there for quite a while and watched his presentation, I don't really have time to sit there and watch a whole match usually, but I felt bad for him, and somebody had the balls to get on there and ask him, why do you have 6 thumbs down? And he was answering every single comment, including mine, which the other people don't. And he said, well, I don't know. I have no idea, So I feel bad for him. What could very well happen, he's giving a live presentation. The counter could get down to 0 where he's just literally talking to himself, So I don't know what he does. Does he go out and blow his brains out at that point and nobody likes him? It's tough. But I can keep on keeping on. I know for sure that my work is good. I know that my results are solid. I know that I have real evidence, and whether anybody acknowledges it or not. But we still have 239 people who looked at that paper. If I was completely nuts and blowing smoke, 239 people would not have looked at that paper. Nor would those 2 prominent people have bothered with it, whom I cannot name or should not name. All right, that's enough for now. If something major develops, I'll let you know.